My sister's mother-in-law took over my whole home for a big holiday party. Then she admitted she knew all along I would say no. My sister's mother-in-law planned an entire party at my house without even asking me first. And the reason was pretty simple. She already knew I would have said no. Christmas had barely gotten past the appetizers when she put one hand on my shoulder, lifted her phone with the other like she was recording some kind of royal announcement, and loudly called me her future daughter-in-law in front of both families. My boyfriend and I had been together for quite a while, but we weren't engaged at the time. And even if we had been engaged, there was absolutely no world in which marrying him would somehow make me that woman's daughter-in-law. She was my sister's mother-in-law. That was it. That was the only connection between us. A distant and slightly awkward branch of the family tree that honestly should have come with labels whenever everyone got together. Since it was Christmas, I corrected her as gently as I could, especially because my mother had spent the entire morning warning me not to start any arguments. "I'm not your daughter-in-law," I said with a little laugh. "Wrong couple." She just smiled at me like I'd made some adorable joke. "Not officially," she replied. My boyfriend made a strange face beside me, while my sister suddenly became very interested in whatever was on her plate. Her husband already looked completely exhausted and dinner hadn't even really started yet. Looking back, that probably should have told me something. Our parents had known each other for years, and once my sister married into his family, everyone decided it would be easier to combine a few of the bigger holidays. Easier is one of those words families love to use right before they make everything much more complicated. My parents liked the arrangement because nobody had to pick sides or split their time between different houses. My sister liked it because she didn't have to shuttle her young daughter back and forth all day. My sister's mother-in-law, on the other hand, seemed to love it because it gave her a much larger audience. Within about 45 minutes, she had rearranged the place cards my mother had carefully made, moved my father's chair, told my boyfriend exactly where he should leave his coat, and announced that the children would be eating after the adults because that was how civilized families behaved. My mother quietly moved the children's plates back where they belonged. My father quietly put his chair back in its original spot. Nobody directly confronted her because we were all doing that ridiculous holiday thing where everyone pretends silence automatically means peace. Then she started taking pictures. These weren't ordinary family photos either. She kept pulling me next to my boyfriend and saying things like, "My other son and his girl, and soon we'll have another wedding." Before I could even figure out what she was doing, she had already posted one of the pictures online. I only realized it because my phone started buzzing in my pocket with messages from people asking whether we'd gotten engaged. I immediately asked her to take the post down. She blinked at me like she couldn't understand why I was making a big deal out of it. "Why? You both look wonderful." I told her the problem was that the caption made it sound like we were engaged when we weren't. She shrugged and said, "People understand what I mean." I looked at her and said, "I don't understand what you mean, and I'm the one in the picture." That was when my sister finally leaned over and quietly whispered, "Can you just let it go for tonight? She wants to feel included." I remember looking at my sister and thinking, included in what exactly? My relationship? My face? My future hypothetical wedding? But my sister had that tight expression around her mouth that told me she'd probably already been dealing with this woman for hours, maybe even days. I felt guilty seeing her like that, so I backed off. I let the picture stay up and convinced myself I was choosing my sister over a pointless Christmas argument. After dessert, she walked over to the fireplace and announced that from that point forward, she would be coordinating all the major family gatherings because too many people were working without any kind of system. My father actually laughed because he assumed she was joking. She didn't laugh with him. On the drive home, my boyfriend finally asked me if she was always like that. "No," I told him, which was technically true. I hadn't known her long enough to understand what always really looked like yet. 5 months later, my boyfriend proposed to me in our kitchen while I was still wearing shelter scrubs and holding a bag of dog food. It wasn't exactly a glamorous proposal, but honestly, it was perfect for us. He had hidden the ring inside the kitchen cabinet where we kept the coffee, but then he got nervous that I would somehow never find it. So he gave up and simply handed me the box himself. I started crying. Then he started crying, and one of our dogs began barking because apparently all that emotional chaos made her think someone was at the front door. We called our parents first, then my brother, and finally my sister. She was absolutely thrilled, squealing so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. For about 20 minutes, it felt like we were little kids again, whispering about what our future weddings might look like. She started asking about dates, colors, venues, and whether our niece could have a role. I told her we hadn't decided anything yet. She laughed and said, "We're planning all of it in the family now," said so warmly she probably didn't realize how much that sentence would matter later. By the next morning, Her mother-in-law had already sent me a 6-paragraph message about buffet options. I politely answered, "Thanks, but we're still figuring things out." Then came chair suggestions. I replied that we hadn't even picked a venue yet. Then an entire list of songs for the family's entrances. I didn't respond to that one. Over the next 6 weeks, she basically attached herself to our wedding, as if we'd secretly hired her. When I said we wanted something small, she told me we'd eventually regret leaving people out. When I said no formal church ceremony, she warned that my future children would wonder why they didn't have traditional wedding pictures. When I mentioned my best friend was handling the pre-wedding party, she said outsiders shouldn't organize family events. My fiancé, and yes, I immediately loved saying that word, wanted me to block her completely. I didn't, mostly because my sister kept apologizing for her and promising she'd get her under control, and because I didn't want to be the person everyone called difficult. Looking back, I was so determined not to seem dramatic that I basically let someone else be dramatic all over me without paying any price for it. The first real fight happened because of my niece. She was sweet, funny, and incredibly shy around crowds. Adored our dogs but froze completely if 3 unfamiliar adults looked at her at once. When we asked if she wanted to be part of the wedding, she immediately burst into tears, genuinely overwhelmed, gripping my sister's shirt. I told her right away she didn't have to participate in anything she wasn't comfortable with. My sister agreed. Her mother-in-law absolutely did not. "She needs to learn confidence," she said at a family lunch, while my niece quietly pushed peas around her plate. "Walking down an aisle will be good for her. She doesn't need exposure therapy at my wedding," I said. She laughed like I'd said something ridiculous. "It's a basket of flowers, not military service." Under the table, my fiancé squeezed my knee because I was about 4 seconds from saying something that would have ruined lunch in a very satisfying way. Instead, we came up with another plan. Our dogs, calm and well-trained, more dependable than half the adults attending, could carry little flower baskets on their harnesses, and my niece could help prepare them privately. No crowd required. She loved the idea and started drawing pictures of the baskets. The mother-in-law reacted like we'd replaced a human child with livestock, announcing to a group of relatives, "Apparently dogs are more important than family now." Afterward, my sister asked if I could just give the woman one small responsibility. The linens, maybe, or the favors, because she feels shut out. She is shut out, I said. It's not her wedding. My sister's eyes filled with tears so fast I felt awful, even though I meant every word. She told me the woman called her every single day demanding updates, that her husband wanted nothing to do with it, and that left her stuck in the middle. Except she wasn't really stuck. She'd stepped into the middle herself and kept asking me to move aside so she'd have more room. Something between us cracked quietly right there beside the restaurant bathroom. Not a big fight, smaller, and somehow worse. The first moment I realized she was starting to see my boundaries as extra work she had to manage. The pre-wedding party was in a rented community room above a cafe. Mismatched chairs, cheap string lights, way too much food. For the first 40 minutes, everything went smoothly. Then, her mother-in-law walked in wearing a sparkly dress and carrying her own microphone, in case the room's sound system didn't work. My best friend calmly took it and put it behind the counter. The woman laughed, got a drink, and spent the next hour getting louder and more determined to give some kind of speech, moving toward the front every time someone else stood up. My best friend stopped her 3 times. My sister tried twice, then gave up after the woman snapped, "I'm allowed to speak about my own family." While my friend was in the bathroom, the woman found the microphone again, tapped it hard enough that people winced, and opened by calling herself my second mother, my actual mother sitting less than 12 feet away. She talked about how lucky my fiancé was to join such a close family, how exciting it would be when the real next generation came along, and pointed first at my niece, then at my stomach, completely ignoring my brother's adopted children sitting nearby with their coloring books. The room went dead silent in that heavy way where everyone realizes the same ugly thing at once. My best friend came back and switched off the mic. "We're done with speeches." The woman kept talking anyway, insisting everyone was being too sensitive, that she was only celebrating biology. My brother stood up. His wife put a hand on his arm. I finally said, "Get off the stage." She stared like she couldn't believe I'd spoken to her that way. I repeated it. "Get off the stage and don't come to my wedding." My sister gasped like I'd slapped someone. My best friend guided the woman out with the calm determination of someone removing a drunk aunt from karaoke. Her husband followed, apologizing to people as he went. My sister ran after them. I ended up crying in the supply closet, furious and ashamed my brother's kids had heard any of it. My fiancé found me and said, "She's not coming, that's final." I agreed. Then, very maturely, I sent my sister 2 angry messages, typed and deleted a third, and sent an apology that still defended every single thing I'd said. The weeks before the wedding turned into a campaign to change my mind. My mother worried excluding someone could permanently damage family relationships. My father said he supported me but wondered if a formal apology might fix things. My sister said her marriage was becoming unbearable because her husband felt forced to choose between me and his mother. Her husband called my fiancé to explain his mother meant well. My fiancé asked which part exactly. The part where she claimed she'd raised his future wife, or the part where adopted kids apparently didn't count. No answer, just, you know how she is. Everybody knew exactly how she was. I was somehow still the only one expected to change. I kept the ban in place and told the venue not to allow anyone to add extra guests. Our wedding day was beautiful in that ordinary, chaotic way real weddings are. One dog shook off her flower basket mid-aisle. My veil caught on a chair. My niece helped with the dogs and then watched happily from the front row with no pressure to perform. My husband forgot half his vows and improvised the rest. My sister came but felt distant all day, smiled for pictures, danced once, checked her phone constantly. During dinner, someone showed me a vague post from the mother-in-law about being excluded from an important family moment by people who couldn't tell the difference between cruelty and healthy boundaries. I turned my phone face down and didn't respond. It didn't feel like winning. The next morning, my sister left the hotel before breakfast. Just tired. No argument. The cold distance between us had already settled in, and we both knew where it came from. About 6 months after the wedding, my husband and I moved into a small house on the edge of town. Old cabinets, a cracked bathroom tile, a half-abandoned dirt patch for a backyard. We loved it anyway. My husband's mother, who knew a lot about gardening, offered to help figure out the yard. She wasn't pushy. She asked what we wanted, showed us which plants were dog-safe, helped install irrigation while the contractors finished the exterior. It was useful, respectful, and almost strangely uneventful. That summer, work sent me to a 4-day regional training. I mentioned the trip to my parents and sister, including that my sister would check on our mother after a dental procedure. I never imagined mentioning a work trip could be considered sensitive information. When I came home, part of the new garden had been completely changed. Neat rows of bright, decorative flowers planted right where the dog-safe plants had been. The irrigation tubing pulled loose and bent around them. Because of my job, I knew some of those plants could make dogs seriously ill. I dropped my bag and ran outside. My husband called the contractor, who explained a woman claiming to be family had said I'd asked for the front bed redone before I got back. The workers had seen her there before with my sister, so they hadn't questioned it. She'd brought the new plants herself, told them where to put everything, and left before lunch. I called my sister. Long silence. "I might have mentioned you were away. I didn't tell her to go there," she finally said. But she had told the woman my schedule and the timeline for the exterior work, excited about the garden getting finished. Her mother-in-law had apparently complained that my husband's mother was taking over and decided she should do something thoughtful too. My sister assumed it was just talk. She always assumed it was just talk until it became my problem. The woman denied knowing the flowers were dangerous, said she'd only wanted to surprise us, and argued I should have responded with gratitude instead of anger. 3 days later, her husband came to our porch with an envelope of money to cover the damage and said quietly, "She gets carried away." I asked if he'd actually told her she wasn't allowed to rip out someone else's plants. He looked at the porch instead of answering. "Talking to her right now won't help," he finally said. Of course it wouldn't. Talking to her had never helped, so everyone always ended up talking to me instead. I took the money, made it very clear in writing to her, my sister, and her husband that she wasn't allowed on our property again, and my husband changed the gate latch. For weeks, I couldn't look at the front yard without feeling invaded. After that, I stopped telling my sister the small, everyday details of my life. No dramatic announcement. I just quietly started editing myself. It felt terrible since we'd always told each other everything, but I couldn't keep handing her pieces of my life that kept getting passed around. By early fall, my parents wanted a family cookout at our house. I agreed on one condition. The mother-in-law wasn't invited. Nobody argued, which in hindsight should have made me suspicious. About 10 days before the cookout, she started flooding social media with dog attack articles, blurry headlines, alarming photos, dramatic captions about children being unsafe around animals, tagging relatives, sending one directly to my sister's husband, eventually posting that responsible adults shouldn't care more about pets than their own human family. Our dogs had never bitten anyone. They were trained and supervised, and I worked with animals professionally. Even so, my sister's husband called and asked if we could lock them in a bedroom for the visit. "They live here," I said. "My daughter is coming. She already knows the dogs. She brushes them every time she visits." My mother is worried. "Your mother isn't coming. That's the whole point." Since she couldn't attend, apparently she was going to control the gathering from a distance anyway. I offered a compromise. Dogs behind a gate at first, then brought out one at a time on leashes. My niece deciding how much she wanted to interact. The cookout went perfectly. My niece spent most of the afternoon throwing a toy for them until my husband begged for his arm back. The most dramatic moment was my father nearly dropping a food tray because he refused help carrying it. My sister's husband stayed tense the whole time anyway, shoulders tightening every time a dog moved. Eventually, I asked him, "Are you actually afraid of them, or just waiting for something to happen so your mother can prove she was right?" He told me not to make everything about his mother. I laughed because sometimes laughing is the only alternative to screaming with guests around. A few weeks later, my sister called late at night, guilt already in her voice. She'd overheard her mother-in-law bragging to a relative that maybe I'd finally learned a lesson, that I couldn't shut family out and expect everyone else to cooperate. The dog posts had never been about safety. They'd been punishment. "When did you hear her say that?" I asked. She hesitated. "A while ago." "What's a while?" "3 weeks." "So you knew all this during the cookout?" She said she hadn't wanted to start another fight. I pointed out she'd let me believe her husband was genuinely afraid of my dogs. "He was worried too," she said, "because she made him worried." Then she started crying, said she was exhausted, that every conversation turned into another crisis, that if she told me everything the woman said about me, we'd probably stop speaking to the whole family. Part of me wanted to comfort her. Another part wanted to throw my phone through the wall. Both were completely real, and that was the biggest problem between us. Her pain was real, but she kept using my privacy, my home, and my relationships as a cushion for her mother-in-law's behavior. The next explosion happened at my niece's birthday party at our parents' house. My brother and his wife brought their adopted children, old enough to understand tone even when adults assumed they weren't listening. The mother-in-law showed up with a huge gift, acting like the previous year had just been some misunderstanding everyone should be over by now. Since it was my parents' house, I didn't control the guest list, so I mostly stayed away from her. Then my husband came across the yard, jaw clenched, one of my brother's kids trailing behind him, confused and near tears. He stopped in front of her near the dessert table. "Would you like to repeat what you just said?" Every nearby conversation stopped. She'd told 2 relatives that my brother's children weren't really my parents' grandchildren since they didn't share the family's blood, with one of the kids close enough to hear. "That's not what I meant," she said, waving her hand. "Then explain what you meant," I said. She said there was a difference between love and lineage. My brother arrived and said quietly, "You call them your grandchildren when you're posting pictures?" She said she called all the children that because families use affectionate language. My husband said, "So they're family when it makes you look warm, but not when you're deciding who actually counts?" I told her to leave. My sister stepped between us. "This is our parents' house. You can't just throw people out." I said I was asking her to leave because she'd just insulted our brother's children. My sister accused me of making a scene. I turned to my father. "Are you going to let her stay?" He set down his tongs and said, "You need to go." She cried what looked like real tears, insisted everyone was attacking her over an ordinary word, argued that children naturally resemble their biological families, which made things worse. 3 cousins called her prejudiced outright. My mother took the birthday girl inside before she could hear more. Her husband guided her to the driveway. My sister hissed at me. "You pushed Dad into humiliating her. She shouldn't have said it, but you always go straight to the maximum response." That sentence did something to me. It felt like something between us finally gave out. My brother cut contact with the woman completely after that. His wife made clear they wouldn't attend anything where she'd be present. Nobody blamed them. Still, my sister acted like the family falling apart was somehow my fault for refusing to quietly absorb another cruel comment. We barely spoke for 5 weeks. My sister was dealing with work stress, childcare problems, constant arguments at home. I knew because my mother kept carrying messages, even though I'd asked her not to. I miss my sister more than I wanted to admit, but reaching out too soon would only teach everyone the same lesson. Hurt me, wait long enough, and I'll come crawling back. Then I tried to be kind. In a way that involved arranging things for her, I bought 3 separate wellness center gift packages, one each for my mother, my husband's mother, and my sister, deliberately on different dates so nobody had to perform family harmony together. When I gave my sister hers, she cried and said she needed it more than I could understand. For a moment, I genuinely thought we were repairing things. Then the mother-in-law found out and called that evening. "I heard the mothers are having a spa day." "No, 3 separate packages for 3 different people. And you didn't think to include me?" "No. At least you're honest. You're not my mother. I'm your sister's mother. You're my sister's mother-in-law." A long pause, then an accusation that I was obsessed with technicalities. "Family relationships are, in fact, technical enough that we have different words for them," I told her. After that, she called my sister over and over, and my sister, apparently unable to handle the pressure, told her she could use the appointment. She hadn't asked me, hadn't checked the transfer policy, The wellness center called me because a woman had shown up demanding to use a package registered under a different name. When they refused, she raised her voice, accused staff of discrimination, and was asked to leave. I called my sister. Why would you give her your gift? She wanted to go, and I don't have the energy to fight her about every little thing. It wasn't a little thing to me. You gave it away. She snapped that, saying yes once would have saved her days of arguments. So you made her my problem again, I said. She said I didn't understand what it was like dealing with her. You're right, I said. I don't understand volunteering someone else's money and plans just so your phone stops ringing. She hung up. I told her later that I wasn't arranging anything for her again if there was any chance she'd just hand it over. She replied that I was punishing her for being overwhelmed. Maybe in some way I was. 4 weeks later, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our houses in a corner table so nobody would overhear. She admitted the pressure had never actually stopped. What I was doing, where, whether we were planning kids, what holidays we'd attend, whether my brother was softening toward her, all funneled through my sister, whose husband kept telling her to just answer because it doesn't really matter. It matters when she uses it, I said. I know, she said quietly. Do you? I asked, and I could see it hurt her, but I said it anyway. We talked for nearly 3 hours. For the first time, she didn't defend the woman, admitted the constant pressure was damaging her marriage, that she felt anxious every time her phone lit up, and more honestly than anything she'd said before, that she'd been sacrificing my comfort because she trusted I'd eventually recover while she didn't trust her mother-in-law to ever stop escalating if pushed back on. I told her we could try to rebuild, but with one clear rule. Nothing about my routine, health, appointments, home, or plans gets shared, no matter how harmless it seemed. She agreed immediately. Her husband joined us near the end and admitted he knew his mother was difficult and often pressured my sister to keep her calm because confronting her felt impossible. My husband later called it a promising first step. I called it a grown man finally noticing the human shield he'd been using. Still, it felt genuine, and things slowly got better. Park trips, quiet dinners, small events without drama. Then I had a minor outpatient procedure, a small cyst removed. Nothing serious, just medication that couldn't mix with alcohol. At a family dinner, I skipped the wine and wore a loose sweater because of the bandage. By Sunday, relatives were messaging my mother asking if I was pregnant. By Monday, the woman had posted about families growing in unexpected ways. By Wednesday, a distant aunt called saying she was praying for healthy news, and a knitted baby hat arrived in the mail. My mother, sounding embarrassed, mentioned almost as an afterthought that my sister had told the mother-in-law about my medication, apparently trying to head off the pregnancy rumors before they got worse. I sent one message to the family group chat. Not pregnant, never announced anything. Please stop speculating. If there's ever something real to share, it'll come from me directly. The woman replied with a heart emoji. We're all just excited for you whenever the time comes. I called my sister. Did you tell her about my medication? Her explaining before actually answering told me everything. She said the woman kept asking why I wasn't drinking, and she thought giving the real reason would make her drop it. You promised me, I said. No health information, no schedule, nothing. When has giving her information ever made her drop anything? I asked. She started crying, said the pressure had never stopped after our coffee shop conversation. She'd just gotten better at hiding it from me. That sentence destroyed the hope I'd built around our last talk. I reminded her she knew exactly what she'd promised and still chose to hand over pieces of my life because exposing me was apparently easier than telling her mother-in-law no. She said that wasn't fair. I said it was fair, even if it wasn't kind. She said I had no idea what her home life was like. I said she had no idea what it felt like, wondering if every private conversation with her would become entertainment for the whole family. Then she said, you always think your boundaries are more important than everyone else's peace. I went quiet because that was the entire problem we'd been circling for years, finally said out loud. Peace meant her mother wasn't screaming. Peace meant her husband didn't have to confront anyone. Peace meant I absorbed the invasion so everyone else could sit and enjoy dinner. Then you can have peace without me, I said, and hung up and blocked her for the night. Not permanently, just long enough that I wouldn't say something I couldn't take back. I sat in my car in the driveway and cried until the porch light came on. My husband climbed in beside me and I showed him the messages and the tiny knitted hat still sitting in the cup holder. Maybe you need to stop waiting for her to become brave at your expense, he said. I hated how right he was. For the next 5 months, my sister and I only spoke when we had to, mostly about our parents. I sent my niece her birthday gift directly instead of through my sister. Meanwhile, her marriage kept fraying. Her husband called mine to complain that gatherings had become impossible, and my husband told him plainly, they became impossible when you made your wife responsible for managing your mother. I missed my sister terribly and still felt for the pressure she was under, but understanding why someone had betrayed my trust didn't mean I had to keep trusting them. As winter approached, I assumed the holidays would be uncomfortable but manageable. Then a distant aunt messaged asking what to bring to the end-of-year gathering at my house. Confused, I asked what gathering, and she sent me a digital invitation. Across the top, a family holiday at Nora's home. Underneath, an old picture of my husband and me outside our house, our full address printed at the bottom, a suggested dress code, and instructions to bring a favorite dish. The host line listed my sister's mother-in-law. I called my husband. He hadn't agreed to anything. I called my parents, who'd assumed I already knew since this woman had organized gatherings before. My mother admitted it felt strange, but she didn't want to question plans she assumed I'd made, and my father had already promised 2 relatives he'd help set up tables. I spent the next hour telling everyone the event had never been approved and wasn't happening at our house. Most people sounded embarrassed once they understood. One relative asked if we could just go ahead since everyone had already saved the date. I said no. Then I called my sister and her husband together so neither would hear a different version. My sister sounded genuinely horrified. Her husband sounded exhausted but not entirely surprised. His mother had mentioned wanting to bring everyone together, just never that she'd use our house. Neither of them had seen the invitation before I sent it. She used a photo of us. She told everyone we agreed to this, I said. My sister whispered, "Oh my God." Her husband tried to explain his mother probably thought she was helping after everything the family had been through. My husband leaned toward the phone. "Don't explain her motive. Deal with what she actually did." A long silence then. "You're right." The first time I'd heard him say that without immediately defending her. He called her on speaker while we stayed on the line. She answered cheerfully, already talking about renting tables until he cut her off. "The event is canceled. You don't have permission to host anything at their house." She claimed she'd only used a picture already available online, that we'd complained about the family being separated, and that she was trying to give Nora a chance to repair what she broke. I made a sound before I could stop myself. My sister, voice shaking, said, "You announced a party at her house without asking her." The woman said simply, "I knew she'd say no if I asked first." There it was. No misunderstanding, no accident, just a plan to pressure the whole family into making a later no harder to say. Her husband told her she wasn't allowed to use our address, our names, or our photo again, and that she needed to cancel it with everyone she'd invited. She accused him of choosing my family over his own. "This isn't about choosing families. You can't volunteer someone else's home," he said, and she hung up on him. I waited for the usual collapse afterward, some request to compromise because his mother was upset. It never came. A few days later, my parents called a meeting. My parents, my sister and her husband, my husband and me, and the woman herself. My brother and his wife declined. I envied how simple their boundary was. She arrived carrying a pie, complimented the decorations, asked my father about his back, and avoided my eyes. Nobody touched the pie. My father explained the family couldn't keep combining every holiday. Everyone had different limits, and forcing people together was doing more damage than separate plans. She immediately turned it on me, accused me of excluding her from my wedding, of turning the family against her over a misunderstood comment, of refusing to share gifts, and now of canceling a gathering she'd organized out of love, insisting I'd spent years punishing her for simply wanting to feel part of the family. I let her finish, then said, "You entered my property while I was away and changed my garden. You used private medical information to spread a pregnancy rumor, and you announced a party at my house because you already knew I'd say no if you asked me. Those aren't attempts to belong. Those are choices to ignore me." She accused me of twisting everything. My mother started to open her mouth, probably to soften things, but my father quietly put his hand over hers, not to silence her, more an acknowledgement that constantly smoothing things over had become part of the problem. My sister looked at her husband. He gave her a small nod. She turned to her mother-in-law. "You announced a party at her house without permission. That isn't bringing the family together. This isn't about everything. It's about what you did." Her husband spoke next, telling his mother she would no longer get information about my life through him or my sister, wouldn't represent them in decisions or invitations, and that if she insulted my brother's kids again, they'd simply leave. She asked if his wife had forced him to say all that. "No," he said. "I should have said it years ago." The whole room shifted. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor, said nobody appreciated everything she'd done to keep the family together, that everyone would regret pushing her away, grabbed her coat and walked out before dinner was even served. The pie sat untouched. My sister went and cried in the bathroom. Her husband sat with both hands over his face. My mother quietly wrapped up the pie and put it in the fridge because apparently even during a total family meltdown, someone has to store the food properly. Eventually, we agreed the holidays needed to be separate. My sister's family with her mother-in-law on the actual day, then a separate gathering with my parents, my husband's parents, my brother and his wife with nobody pressured into anything and no messages carried between the two. It sounded simple reduced to one sentence. Living with it was harder. The woman called relatives and posted vague complaints that I destroyed the family over one mistake she could never actually name. A few relatives asked my mother about another meeting. My father said the decision wasn't up for debate. My sister's husband started handling his mother directly himself, complained about the stress at first, until my sister told him she'd been carrying that same stress for years and was done doing it alone. They argued, then started counseling. I only heard the broad version because my sister was careful not to make me responsible for processing every detail of their marriage, and that mattered to me more than she probably realized. The first separate holiday felt strange. My sister showed up with her daughter and a casserole, looking tired but calmer than I'd seen her in a long time. Her phone buzzed 3 times during dinner. Each time she turned it face down and kept talking. Our niece played with the dogs alongside my brother's kids. My husband's mother brought a plant and asked where I wanted it before setting it down. The contrast was almost funny. Later, washing dishes side by side, my sister said quietly, "I'm sorry. Not just for telling her things. I'm sorry I kept making your reaction the problem because I couldn't handle hers." I'd wanted that apology for years. It didn't magically erase everything, but I nodded and said, "Thank you." She asked if we'd ever be close again. "I hope so," I said, "but I need to see the change last longer than one holiday." She looked hurt for a second, then nodded. "That's fair." Strangely, that answer gave me more hope than the apology itself. Over the next 7 months, the change actually lasted. My sister stopped sharing information about me. No announcements each time she pushed back on a new demand. She just stopped doing it. Her husband dealt with his mother directly instead of routing everything through her. My parents stopped engineering surprise encounters. My brother's family started coming back around because the guest lists stayed clear and honest. The woman never apologized to me. For a while, I kept waiting, thinking closure required some acknowledgement from her until I realized an apology from her would just turn into another argument about what she'd meant. I stopped needing one. That didn't mean I stopped being angry. Sometimes an old garden photo would catch that empty patch and bring back the tightness in my chest. Drama isn't weather, I'd think. It doesn't roll into town on its own. People make choices, and everyone else calls the consequences a storm. 14 months passed before I finally trusted the new arrangement enough to stop waiting for it to collapse. Then, during the next holiday weekend, my sister called to say she and her daughter were coming by that afternoon, adding before I could even ask, "I didn't tell her the day, the time, or who'll be there. She knows we're making separate plans, and that's all." Such a small sentence, no speech, no expectation of praise, just proof she finally understood what I'd been asking for. Our niece ran straight into the backyard. The dogs, a little older and slower now, thrilled behind her. My parents arrived, then my husband's parents with food, then my brother and his wife with their kids, running around with the easy confidence of children who no longer wondered if they belonged. The afternoon was completely, almost boringly normal, and it felt wonderful. I'd eat too much food, an argument about the grill, a dog stealing a napkin. Nobody watched the driveway. Nobody wondered if another surprise was coming. At one point, my phone buzzed. The woman had posted an old family photo captioned about people abandoning those who loved them most. A year earlier, I would have spiraled over it for the rest of the day. This time, I looked at it for maybe 6 seconds. My sister noticed but didn't ask what I'd seen, just slid a plate toward me and said the food was getting cold. I put the phone away. And honestly, that was what peace looked like for us in the end. Not forgiveness, not some perfect reunion where the past becomes one big misunderstanding. Just separate plans, limited information, doors that stayed closed unless we chose to open them, and a sister who finally understood that keeping the peace shouldn't require offering me up as the price. Outside, my niece was showing my brother's kids how to hide treats for the dogs to find. My husband was arguing with my father about the grill. My mother was already packing leftovers before anyone had officially finished eating. Life kept moving forward in its ordinary, messy way. The woman could post whatever she wanted, call herself abandoned, misunderstood, excluded, unappreciated. But for once, her version of the family didn't decide what happened inside my house. I put my phone down, went back to the table, and made sure I got there before the food had a chance to get cold.